Hi, this is David with EdgeStar Technical Support. Today we're going to cover our BR7000SS built-in kegerator and our BR7000SS outdoor rated kegerator. We're going to show you how to assemble the unit and how it operates. Alright folks, so what I've done here is I've gone ahead and have the contents of those boxes here for your viewing pleasure. And we're going to start over here and kind of work our way over. So as you can see, we have some red casters here. Of course, those go on the bottom. I just want to make a point, they're not a requirement for operation of the unit. They are optional. Generally speaking, you'll install those. There may be situations where if it's going under a counter or something, we might not have the clearance for that, but typically we'll put those on. Also in that box, we have our stainless steel drip tray, our strap that holds our tank in place, and we have our screws, keys, and our reversing hinge assembly here as well. Of course, we have the owner's manual. We also have our CO2 tank here. Remember, the CO2 tanks are shipped empty. You must find a local retailer or purveyor of CO2 and have that filled at your own expense. Over here in this last box, that big box that we pulled out, we have our tower. In this case, a single tap. They do come in a dual tap flavor as well. We're not going to be showing that in this video. So this is our single tower. Our hoses that go along with it for the CO2. We also have our regulator. And this is a deluxe regulator. And the reason it's deluxe is because not only do we see the line pressure, we can also see what's in the tank as well. And that's definitely handy to know. We also have our screws that hold the tower in place. Our faucet that goes right in here. And we have our gasket and our handle for the tap when we pull it. And of course we have our coupler here for our beer and CO2. So these are the things that you'll find in those boxes. In our next segment, we're going to show you how it all goes together. Alright, so step one on our installation here, what I've done is I've pre-installed 3 of the 4 casters already. I'll show you how to put the 4th one in. But before you do that, you do need to lay the kegerator on its back in order to do this. I will say that if you do tip the kegerator over on its back, when you're all done and it's assembled, I'd probably wait at least 2 hours, let that refrigerant kind of settle back in the compressor, just so that we don't have any potential problems crop up from us turning the unit over and then immediately putting it back upright. So as you can see, again, I've installed 3 of these. In order to do this, they come originally with 4 of these little feet, and you'll take 4 of those out. There is a 5th one in that bottom brace right in the center. Just leave that one be, it's fine. It's not going to hurt anything if you leave it in there. But you'll want to keep these just in case you want to use this as a stationary application. You can just take these casters off, put these feet back in, and you're good to go. So the first thing we're going to do, of course, we're going to remove that foot, and it goes right in the center here. You just turn it out and then set it aside. And I've already kind of zipped these screws loose. Be careful when you take these screws out, because they typically will have a locking washer on them, and you'll want to try and leave that on there. And if this pad comes loose, no worries, no big deal. So you'll just line it all back up and put the pad back on it. We'll take this last screw out here, and then we can go ahead and get our caster started. And by the way, 2 of these have locks, 2 of them don't. The ones that have locks, they go in the front. Just zip these guys down. Alright, so now we're ready to set the kegerator upright, and we'll continue on with our installation. Alright, so we're going to talk about some of our external parts on the kegerator and how they're installed, namely the tail bar style handle, our drip rail, and tower. Since I'm working with the drip rail first, we're going to get that out of the way and then we'll move on. So what I've done here is I'm ready to install my drip rail. I'm going to go ahead and take this off, and we'll talk about what's underneath of it. So I'm going to set this aside for just a second. Okay. So let's talk about what holds our drip rail to the actual tower, or the top of the unit here. With the drip rail, you'll find that there are some side screws, and you've got some studs that go into the top of the kegerator here. So let's talk about this first. On each one of these, you'll have a side screw here on each post. You need to remove that. When you remove that, your stud will drop out. The screw holds the stud in place. So let's talk about how we install these studs, and then we'll get into actually putting the railing on. When you first get your kegerator, you're going to have some of these short screws. There's 4 of them. You're going to remove those, and you're going to put those in a safe place if you ever decide to remove the drip rail, because those will go back in place to cover the holes. So you're going to remove all 4 of your screws. I've already done that. And I've already removed all of the side screws on that drip rail, and I've got all the studs out of it. So here's what the stud looks like. It's pretty small, and it has a slotted blade top for a flat blade screwdriver in here. You can just put these in hand tight. You can snug them up if you want to, but they're pretty tight by themselves. So as you can see, I've already got 3 of them installed. So all you do is take that screw out, those short ones. You're going to thread this stud in here. You'll thread it all the way down until it stops. And then we'll take our screwdriver and we'll go into this slotted portion here and just snug it up just a little bit. They don't need to be extra tight. So what you'll do is you'll center the holes up, drop it on top of the studs, and now we can put our side screws in. So the side screws are actually on the outside, and I'm not sure if you can see this here, but they just screw into the side of the drip rail, and that will secure the drip rail to the studs. So there we are. I've got that one started. And then we'll just zip it in here. And there we go. Now I can't pull out. Okay. So, once we've done that, that completes the install on our drip rail. Let's talk about our handle. I've already pre-installed it. And right here on the video, I know you can only see just the top portion. There's 4 screws pre-installed. You take your handle, line it up, and remove your screws from the door. Put your screws through the handle and into the door, and then tighten them up. That's all you have to do. And again, don't over tighten this. You can strip the threads out inside the door. So there's our handle install. The other thing that we need to talk about now when we get into the big stuff is our tower. So what we're going to do first is we're going to remove this plug cap. The plug cap is important because it allows the kegerator to be used as a fridge as well. So keep that in a safe spot and don't lose it. So how we get that out is we just take one hand and just come up in here and just pop it out. Now, normally what you're going to see is you'll see 4 screws already pre-installed, and this gasket sits underneath those screws. The gasket's important because it's going to seal our tower to the top of the kegerator. Now, when you unpack your tower, you're going to see an extra gasket, and you'll see a bunch of screws here. We're not going to use the screws unless you decide to go through the countertop installation, which is where you set the tower on the countertop and then secure it to the countertop with the screws. In this case, we're not going to do that, so we won't be using these. So what we need to do now is get ready for our tower. To do that, we're going to grab our tower, and the beer line is actually packaged inside of here. Inside this hole, you're going to find another tube that comes up through the center of the hole. That refrigerates, it sends cold air up into the tower so that we can refrigerate this tower so it's fridged all the way from the keg all the way in through our spout here at the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this out and I'm going to feed this to the center. And actually, before I do that, make sure that you install this gasket before you do that, because if you don't, you won't have any way of getting the gasket on. So we'll just set that gasket in place. and we'll feed this down. Here's the tricky part. We've got to make sure that all these holes are lined up before we put our screws in, and that'll give us a good seal. Alright, so I pretty well got that lined up. If you do these screws correctly, they'll be flush with this piece of trim. So we'll go ahead and zip these guys down. Okay, so we've got that secured. Now we're ready to install our faucet and our handle. And by the way, I've pre-installed our handle, but in your packaging it's going to be loose like that. So we'll go ahead and just put that on there. Snug it up. And then we're going to put our gasket. Our gasket is very important. If we don't have the gasket centered correctly inside this faucet, what's going to happen is it's going to end up leaking. So make sure you seat your gasket just like that. And this has a left-hand thread, and I'm not going to really tighten this fully, but it goes in the opposite direction that you think it would, and that helps to pull this faucet back into the tower. So then once you get done, it should sit just like that, and that would complete the installation on our tower. Alright, so now we're ready for the fun part. So here's where we're going to make our beer flow, and then we're almost ready to tap our keg. So as you can see, I've got all my stuff down here. I've got our tank. You have your CO2 line. This is your beer line gasket. We'll talk about that. A couple of hose clamps. We'll talk about those. Our coupler. We'll get into that. And of course, our regulator. We'll get into that as well. The first thing we need to do is there's a blue cap over the top of our coupler. And what we're going to do is we're just going to pry that off of there. What we're going to do here is go ahead and install our gas line first. So let's pick up our gas line. It doesn't matter what end you use. So what we're going to do is grab a clamp and slide our clamp onto the hose. We're going to insert our hose, and by the way, once you get, I'm not going to fully put this on there, and the reason for that is these hoses fit so well that you almost don't need the clamp, but you do want to put the clamp on there. But they fit so well, they're going to be really, really difficult to get off of this barb. They're really hard, so I'm not going to put it all the way on there. And then, but once you're done with that, and this line is seated all the way against this nut, then you'll put your clamp on, slide your clamp, and tighten it down. So we're going to go ahead, just for purposes of illustration, and we're going to go ahead and drive this clamp home. So you're going to turn it clockwise, and don't over tighten it. You'll know you're over tightening because what's going to happen is you'll have this hose, pieces of it will actually come through these little slots. You don't want that. That's just way too tight. So all you're going to do is tighten this up so that this clamp doesn't move. Ideally, once you're done with this setup, you would want to soap test it and make sure the CO2 side doesn't leak. If it does leak a little bit, just snug the clamp up a hair more and forget it, because otherwise we're going to over tighten it. That should cure your leak anyway. So we're ready to go ahead and set this up on our regulator. So we're going to set our coupler end of it down for now. We're going to grab our regulator. Now your regulator also has a barb here at the bottom. And by the way, make sure your tank is off during the installation. If for some reason it's on, make sure at least this valve is all the way up. That'll block off this port, because otherwise we're going to have CO2 coming out this end and this end, and we don't want that. So let's go ahead and put our line onto this barb. We're going to grab our other clamp, and we're basically going to rinse and repeat here. So we're going to put our clamp on. We're going to install our line. And then once we get our line installed, again, we're going to snug up this clamp. And just remember that just tighten it up until it's snug and no more. But always check your CO2 for leaks before you install your keg. Because nobody wants to run into a flat keg, and that's an easy way to do it. So make sure you've got that checked out. Okay, so this is our regulator. We're ready to mount our regulator to the tank. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this to where it's facing like this, because once you get this into the unit, you're going to have to orientate it just slightly like that to make sure that you have clearance for your regulator. So we're going to slide our brass nut all the way to the end. And remember, we're just doing this for illustration, so your experience here may be a little different. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and thread that in so we can see what it looks like once that nut is snugged up. You're also going to need a crescent wrench for this. Again, just for purposes of illustration, we're just hand tightening it. Alright, so our regulator is installed. Our CO2 line is installed, and our coupler is at the other end. So the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set up our beer line, and our beer line hooks to the top of the coupler. Now you have one more gasket here, and I'm going to pick up my beer line. On the bottom of this beer line, there's a flat fitting. There it is. So we need to install our beer line washer. So we're going to drop our beer line washer, going to push this all the way to the end, drop in our beer line washer. We're going to pick up our coupler. And then you're going to thread your beer line onto the top of the coupler. Now the thing to remember here is to keep this line straight, because we want these two surfaces to mate on that gasket. So we're just going to kind of keep it straight. And we're going to snug that down good and tight. So once we get our CO2 canister mounted into the strap back there and sit on that upper platform, we can go ahead and put our keg in. We're going to tap our keg. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up in there to show you what it looks like. And then what you're going to do, you'll take your strap and you'll tighten up your strap. And that'll strap your CO2 cylinder in there. And then we're ready to go ahead and install our keg. Alright, so now we're ready for the fun part. We're going to get our keg installed. Before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about the keg sizes and the different configurations that our unit can handle. So primarily we'll all be using a regular full-size keg. This is typically what we'll find in stores. You can also do a quarter keg or a slim quarter, or you can do a corny or Cornelius keg, but those are typically reserved for homebrew use. We don't see these much at the store. So our unit's designed to handle multiple configurations, especially when you get into the slim quarter and the quarter barrel and the Cornelius keg. All of those can be put in different configurations, but with a full-size keg, that's all that we can fit in there. So what I'm going to do now is we're ready to go ahead and we're ready to put in our keg. So I'm going to slide these guys out of the way and we'll go ahead and get our keg installed. Okay, so we're ready to go. Now the one thing that we have to remember here before we do anything else, make sure this keg is cold. You'll want cold beer. So make sure when you get this from the store that you don't waste any time putting it in. You want to make sure that everything's ready to go. Also, the kegerator itself needs to be conditioned down to the proper temperature for whatever beer that you're running. So I'll talk about the controls in our very last segment, but we need to make sure that this thing is running for at least 24 to 48 hours before you install your keg. because you don't want that temperature to really change a whole lot from the way home into the kegerator. So we're just about ready here to go ahead and install it. So we're going to go ahead and set up our regulator. Now, let's assume for the moment that we have a full tank. We're going to turn our valve on. So we're going to turn our valve on full on top of the tank. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to pull our center knob out on the regulator. It pulls out and then turns. And once you're done, it pushes back in to lock it in place so it doesn't move. So we're going to pull it out. You're going to use your gauges. This one shows your line pressure. This one shows how much is left in the tank. And that's a good idea because we need to know where that is. Now, depending on the beer that you have, you're going to need to set your pressure accordingly. Since there's so many beers, I'm not going to get into that discussion here. We're just going to show you how it installs. So we've turned on our gas. We've set our pressure where we want it. The last thing that we need to do is hook up our coupler. So we're going to take our keg. And if you notice, there's little cutouts, one on each side. They match cutouts, the little tabs, inside our kegerator, the keg here. In order to lock this in place, we're going to set the tabs and slots in place, and we're going to turn it until it stops. And we've got a good seal here. Once we're done with that, you're going to pull your handle out and make sure it locks into position. You're going to push it all the way down and then release your spring-loaded handle. That's going to release the beer into our beer line. The very last thing we need to do is pressurize this keg. In order to do that, we've already got our valve on, we've already got our regulator set. We need to come down to our little secondary valve here, and we're going to set it so that it's in line with the hose. When you do that, you should hear the air rushing into the keg. Give it a couple of minutes. And then what you can do is set this inside. So let's set this kegerator up here. Let's set this keg inside. And make our lines out of the way. And you can just arrange these however you want. It doesn't really matter. And there we are. I like to be a little neat. I like to tuck the lines to the back, but we're good, and we can shut the door, and we're ready to serve beer. Once everything's installed, you want to grab your stainless steel drip tray, peel the plastic off of it, of course, and then set it here where it can catch any drips. And then inside of here, I'm going to open this up, and I think the really neatest part about this kegerator is the control panel. The reason I say that is because it has a built-in light, which is a first for these kegerators, and I think it's great because you can really see what you're doing in here. But this is our control panel. So if you look here, there's our power button. We have our light on and off and our temperature up and down. Now this pad is temperature or touch sensitive, so all you have to do is just kind of tap it. You don't want to push it real hard or you'll break the circuit board. So this top one here is power, so we would hold that in for a few seconds and that would turn the unit off or on, either way. Of course, our light, and then our temperature up and down. So I've gone over our controls. Again, you would just set your temperature. There is no other button to set. Just choose whatever temperature that you want via the up and down buttons. Once you've reached that desired temperature, just let the button go and it will automatically set itself without any further intervention by you. So now that we've got that set, our keg is installed, our CO2 is installed, and we've got gas. And yeah, I've got a little gas there. So we're good to go. And you'll be drinking beer in no time. I hope that this do-it-yourself video has helped you to install and enjoy your new BR7000 SS and BR7000 SSOD outdoor kegerator. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact EdgeStar Technical Support at www.edgestar.com. Hi, this is David with EdgeStar Technical Support. Today we're going to cover our BR7000SS built-in kegerator and our BR7000SS outdoor rated kegerator. We're going to show you how to assemble the unit and how it operates. Alright folks, so what I've done here is I've gone ahead and have the contents of those boxes here for your viewing pleasure. And we're going to start over here and kind of work our way over. So as you can see, we have some red casters here. Of course, those go on the bottom. I just want to make a point, they're not a requirement for operation of the unit. They are optional. Generally speaking, you'll install those. There may be situations where if it's going under a counter or something, we might not have the clearance for that, but typically we'll put those on. Also in that box, we have our stainless steel drip tray, our strap that holds our tank in place, and we have our screws, keys, and our reversing hinge assembly here as well. Of course, we have the owner's manual. We also have our CO2 tank here. Remember, the CO2 tanks are shipped empty. You must find a local retailer or purveyor of CO2 and have that filled at your own expense. Over here in this last box, that big box that we pulled out, we have our tower. In this case, a single tap. They do come in a dual tap flavor as well. We're not going to be showing that in this video. So this is our single tower. Our hoses that go along with it for the CO2. We also have our regulator. And this is a deluxe regulator. And the reason it's deluxe is because not only do we see the line pressure, we can also see what's in the tank as well. And that's definitely handy to know. We also have our screws that hold the tower in place. Our faucet that goes right in here. And we have our gasket and our handle for the tap when we pull it. And of course we have our coupler here for our beer and CO2. So these are the things that you'll find in those boxes. In our next segment, we're going to show you how it all goes together. Alright, so step one on our installation here, what I've done is I've pre-installed 3 of the 4 casters already. I'll show you how to put the 4th one in. But before you do that, you do need to lay the kegerator on its back in order to do this. I will